Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I interview founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, amazing people all around the world of crypto and blockchain globally. And today I have an amazing guest. I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and it is quite a time to have this conversation. And I hope everybody tunes in and enjoys. I have Shishkin, who is the founder of informed.now. Kira, welcome to the show today.
Jamil, thank you so much for having me. It's a delightful to be welcomed on the show, and I'm excited for this conversation.
Awesome, pleasure to have you. So let's kick off things off first, and I always ask everybody the same question and get really awesome answers. And I might actually turn every answer into again this question into its own book. But what is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
Wow. I come across very few logical backgrounds for what folks are doing. I think in my case, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And so now looking backwards, I'm sort of seeing a pattern that's emerged, but also kind of going through it, going through the motions. It never felt obvious to me that I would be running an anti-news company at this stage. So I would say the two big threads of my life is one, a very global upbringing, a very global sort of experience around the world. I was born and raised in Ukraine, in Kiev. I sort of came of age, spent my young adulthood in Israel. Then it came to the United States, and have been all around the United States, East Coast, Midwest, West Coast. And I've just seen the stakes of misinformation, of information overload be really, really high, across all of these very loud conflicts. I would kind of categorize Ukraine as one of the most important conflicts of our time, especially as it concerns Ukraine and the world and peace and democracy. I would say, Israel and the whole Middle East conflict that, surrounds it is also one of the most consequential. And what's happening in the US right now is a civil war. It's a cultural, it's a social civil war. And so these are very high stakes environments for being informed, having your own opinion, having a tap on reality, like having a pulse check on what's going on around you. It isn't really an option or a time right now to disengage, to isolate, and to put your head in the sand. So I think that's the thread of the global perspective and the global interest, right? And Informed.now serves news without noise, not just American, but global scale. So I think that's the one thread of my life that sort of gives me the background into doing world news. The other one is much more personal, and it comes from this idea of attention. There was a point in my life where I was disabled for a couple of years, physically and cognitively, and it was a very difficult time because I lost my ability to wield focus. I couldn't wield my attention, and I've recovered since. I'd like to think. Took me a long time, many years, but as I observe the media industry today, uh, it completely jeopardizes attention. It commodifies attention, and it sort of, it terrorizes attention. And when I observed that, I was like, I never want anyone to experience what I've experienced. This kind of loss of attention. And are there ways that I can help folks restore the power of their attention, the power of their peace of mind, the power of their focus, give it back to them? And that sort of speaks to the format and the mission behind Informed.now, is that in the context of world news, we're giving folks a way to stay informed without being overwhelmed, without being hijacked, without being kind of held hostage by the media algorithm or the media agenda. And so those are the two big threads that sort of build the foundation for what Informed.now is today. It's the honoring of attention and the global citizen sensitivity, as a global awareness. Um, maybe those two come to mind.
Great. I'm going to ask you, I was about to ask you what informed now is, but, overall, your vision, your mission, your long-term impact, you're looking to get rid of this culture, end the cultural civil war, and the traditional media from terrorizing people and lying to them. What's your long-term goal here and
Totally.
mission?
We really want to introduce a new news reading habit to a new generation of news readers, whether that's, anyone who is, just coming of age into the world of news reading, but also folks that have been frustrated by the solutions that surrounded them for the last couple of decades. Anyone who thinks of themselves as wanting to upgrade and sort of clean up their information diet, we want to give them an option of not going to the legacy media way, right? That is disrespectful of your attention, that is looking to clickbait, sensationalize, dramatize, and hijack your attention in the way that it's delivered. Most news today, and meanwhile, also not letting any of the bias, any of the agenda, any of the sponsor interest permeate the integrity of quality journalism and quality reporting, factual reporting. So zooming out a little bit, I would say news, like legacy news industry today, can't help itself but clickbait, sensationalize, and it's a structural sensationalism to grasp a reader's attention. And then once they have the reader's attention, they can't help but try to retain it for as long as possible. This is because they are beholden to advertiser interest, which is how that industry is sponsored and how the industry is run. Um, but we're rethinking that. What if you could have news that's designed for the reader instead of designed for the advertiser? What if you could have news that has no agenda, no sponsorship bias, none of this noise that's making it hard for you to figure out what the actual facts are? What if we could get rid of that? And alongside that, what if we could also get rid of all these advertisements that are soliciting and just are everywhere on the news article? So we're really reinventing news readership with this new habit of focusing on the facts, focusing on things that are, you know, ground truth and um, focused on what's actually going on, not what does somebody think about it, what is the anchor's opinion, what is the sponsor's opinion, what is the advertisement that goes with this, right? So we're really hoping to evolve the news media industry by introducing a new, very minimalist habit for a new generation of readers.
Got it. I like it. Now let's see. Let's think about something in practical application. When I used to work on Wall Street, you know, I would get the Wall Street Journal. I would look at the bottom left-hand corner of the front page that would do the highlights, the major news events, but like just the data. Say, okay, I knew what's going on. Now if you do that, and the common person doesn't really understand what the data and economics means, they will most likely turn to social media to try to understand. And there's a lot of, they say, I'm gonna curse on my own show. Opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got them, and most all of them stink, right? People are out there. The loudest ones are getting penetrated through all the noise. And that becomes the fact, even though it's way off.
Mhm.
How do we get people in a position where, okay, they know what's going on factually, and they can interpret it instead of relying on someone else's horrible take to understand what's going on.
Totally. There's so much commentary and pundit sizing of news that it's almost impossible to encounter news in their pure form. It's almost impossible in today's kind of attention economy and media industry to just read the facts without any spin. Like, whether you're a Wall Street Journal reader, Washington Post reader, or maybe you are more of a New York Times and a New Yorker reader. Maybe you are, a CNN, a CNBC reader. Maybe you're a Fox News reader. It doesn't really matter which bucket you are subscribing to. They None of those names give you news. What they give you is news commentary. And news commentary is not the same thing as news. It's an already sort of digested, processed opinion that is being presented through selective evidence, through selective interviews, through a perspective lens. And we serve people who aren't interested in having their mind made up for them. They want to make up their own mind on things. And so when we think about our format and our process, it's extremely minimal because we stop short of providing any sort of opinion, color, or commentary. That's up to you. That's up to the reader to decide whether you like the tariffs or you don't like the tariffs, whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, whether you like what's happening in the economy or you don't. That's for the reader to decide. Our job is to give you the facts, give you the tools to make up your own mind. And we do so with a almost a religious focus on primary sourcing. We focus not on, reading other journalists. We focus on getting to the source. If it's an economic update, we're not going to get it from CNBC, right? They don't even cite their sources. It all comes from the primary source of central banks, Bureau of Labor Statistics, Bureau, Census Bureau, and there are tons of primary sources that originate this data and this information, and we'd rather go there. There's a Supreme Court case that you need to know about. We're not going to send you to some pundit talking about it. We're going to send you to the actual Supreme Court opinion, the Supreme Court statement. If there's a White House statement, instead of having Fox News tell you about how great it is or CNN tell you about how terrible it is, we'll just actually directly read the White House announcement and link it for you so that you can interact directly with the primary source of the issue. And so, this is so obvious, right? It's like, what if we could create objective news? We would just look at primary sources and stop short of giving commentary, but nobody does it, right? We're sort of in a category of our own, building and creating what we've done.
What if the primary source data is wrong?
Well, we always cite the, what is being alleged. Instead of saying this is the truth, we never really say that, right? We say this is what the White House is saying, right? So it's still up to you to say, okay, well, do I believe them? Do I agree with them? That's up to you. But we're not going to ever say this is the truth because White House said it. We're saying this is what the White House said, and now you get to make up your own mind whether you buy this or not. And so there's a layer of keeping a distance from the opinion, of not assuming anything is true, of just saying, okay, employment report is in. Here is what the employment report says. You might not believe it. You might not agree with it. You might think it's inaccurate. We are not presenting that as fact or truth. We're presenting that as a primary origination of this information, right? Which is a difference from the rest of the industry, which, first of all, doesn't show you their sources. You look at any news article, they don't tell you where they get information from, although we all know we get it from the same place because there's only one place where the Supreme Court opinions are published, and that's the Supreme Court, right? If it's a bill of Congress, right, we know where that comes from. It comes from the Library of Congress repository of bills. It's not something that CNBC has that other people don't have. It's not something that CNN has that other people don't have. It just, they don't have the decency to, show their sources and to link their sources and to really just cite their sources, which is basic high school integrity, right? Academic integrity. We do that while not commenting on, what you should think about it, how you should feel about it.
Got it. I like that, and I like I like your use of the word decency because, I mean, my wife goes to work every day and she turns the news on beforehand and she wants to get the weather report. But then they get into, Trump did this, Trump did that. And I'm looking, I'm like, and then the other side, like, they're spinning the data however they want to spin their narrative. But I'm like, who are their executives? And I'm like, the executives don't like Trump. And then you talked about, Israel, and I'm like, all their executives are from Israel, all the money. So why is it that they are bashing and trashing Trump every single day? Like, that should be either outlawed or illegal, or they should be held to account on what they actually say. So how do you fix that?
Totally. And I think it goes even deeper. You mentioned the sort of the executives, but it isn't just about the executives. It's also about the sponsors and about the shareholders and about the advertisers who all have a spin that they would like to see on the reel. And I would say, executives are beholden to advertiser interest and to sponsor interest because those are the guys that are actually paying for the industry, right? It's like, we read news for free most of the time, because we're not the ones paying for them. We're not the ones paying for them because we're not the customer. The advertiser is the customer of this industry. We are the product that's being sold to the advertiser, for a pretty penny. And because the advertiser is the customer, what they want, right, which is sensationalism, which is verbosity, which is dragging you into the black hole for as long as possible, and sponsors, right, who may have an Israel agenda, may have an anti-Israel agenda, may have a Trump agenda, may have an anti-Trump agenda. It's structural. It isn't accidental. It's a completely financial incentive, business incentive, structural consequence. And it's been this way for so long, and across the board, on the left side, on the right side, on the upside, downside, everywhere, that you can't even, and most people can't even imagine that news could be different. That news don't have to be broken like this. News don't have to be corrupt like this. News can be better. But it starts with putting the reader first and refusing advertiser revenue, refusing sponsor revenue, refusing platform revenue, and refusing the personal bias of whoever these executives and editors in chief may be. And that's really hard to do, with the infrastructure that exists today in the American news media ecosystem. It's very hard to undo, right? And so, disruptors like us who are looking to make a dent, to make a difference, we don't have it easy. It's very much an uphill battle, but it's worth fighting, because even if we can save, I mean, I'm being dramatic with the word save, but even if we can help a small fraction of people who are looking for a better, cleaner, healthier relationship with information, it will be plenty. We don't have to save the world. We have to save the people that are looking for us.
Well, you them creating us into the product is something that you talked about earlier, as there is a cultural civil war going on. As a result of all this, us being the product, there's a cultural. How do we what's the trajectory you see of that cultural civil war? Is going to escalate, and how do we prevent it from escalating, and how do we get to a place of common understanding?
Totally. I mean, I do really do fundamentally think that, we have so much more in common than we have different. As I'm thinking about the American population, right? The American body. We are so alike, even in our diversity, that is socioeconomic, that is cultural, that is racial, that is, urban, rural, that is political. We are so diverse, and yet, like, we have so much in common. I really don't think of America as necessarily divided. I don't think that has to be the case. I don't think, a Californian and a Texan and a New Yorker and a Midwestern person, I really don't think that there is cause for strife. There really isn't. And coming from a background in Israel, in Ukraine, I've seen, what conflict can look like at the most radical expressions of it. And America has no business fighting with itself. There's no business. And you know, when I'm left thinking, why is it that you can't have political conversations with your friends anymore? Why is it that America feels so hyper polarized? It's really in to such a great degree. It's not the only influence, but to such a great degree, the news narrative that is being fed to the American population, which is done in a very malicious way. Again, it's also very structurally malicious, where there's this tribal kind of like Fox News part of town, and there's like CNN, CNBC. You can pick whatever to represent the buckets. They are feeding these, pre-existing belief, prejudice, and already like reaffirmed opinion of their tribes, and they are feeding what is very much an artificial conflict, right? What is very much not necessary, like social, political, and cultural strife, by spinning the stories in ways that are reaffirming, already existing beliefs, and saying, yeah, of course you're right, absolutely you're right. The other people are crazy, right? And the fact that each side is saying the other side is crazy is one of the most toxic influences on our culture, because it's not true. right? It's not true that the other side is crazy. But if we keep being told that from either side, how do you not wind up in a civil war? And so, I really lament and regret where we've come to in the United States kind of media world. And, you know, it just makes me think, it doesn't have to be this way. And informed.now, I think, is a project that isn't political, it isn't cultural, it's the opposite of that. But it's looking to give people the same fact base. Because very often people disagree on, they don't even agree on things they disagree on. Like there's such a schism in the fact basis that folks are drawing from that it's really hard to bridge that. With informed.now, we're looking to at least give people the same fact base so that they can reference the same pool of like, what are we even talking about? What are we even disagreeing on? Before they have the conversation of like, hey, I believe this, I believe that. You can have that constructive debate and exchange, but let's first align on what the fact base is that we're discussing. And in many ways, not being political, not being, cultural, social project, we're looking to restore like that information integrity and information architecture, information infrastructure, so that people can disagree constructively, engage constructively, and just be on the same page, even if there's healthy disagreement.
Well, yeah. Well, you mentioned Ukraine. I wrote a book in 2022, and when the war first broke out with Russia and Ukraine, I interviewed a bunch of founders, entrepreneurs, and some government officials in Ukraine. I wrote a book called "Old Paradigms Die Hard." And I was referencing in that title the Russian propaganda machine. How would you compare the U.S. News journalism ecosystem to the Russian propaganda machine? And how would you be able to break that if you could?
Totally. I think they're quite different, right? I feel the Russian propaganda machine, which is very real and very tangible. It's not a conspiracy theory. It is, an accurate description of reality. The Russian propaganda machine is dictatorial, where you don't have options. Like you don't have options to read something else because the machine doesn't allow other voices, dissenting voices, to be heard on large platforms. Like you can't be on TV and criticize the Russian government. It's just not possible, right? And so you can't really have a dissenting opinion. You don't really have as a reader or as an audience, you don't have alternatives to consume other type of media at scale. Like the masses cannot consume other type of media. It's prohibited. It's strongly disincentivized, and in ways that it's not something you have access to, right? And so and it's lies. It's directly, sometimes subtle, sometimes radical bullshit. That's led us to the Ukraine invasion and attack that was built on a set of lies that were so distant from reality that it's almost hard to imagine how like people were even able to be convinced of that, right? But so that's how I would categorize like the Russian propaganda machine. It's very authoritarian, and you don't really have competing voices, right? The Navalny is very famous conflict, but you know, any dissenter that is coming in being close to being effective is going to get imprisoned, murdered, assassinated, and thrown on the rug. Um, in America, it's a completely different machine. There are many options, right? Apart from the bipartisan spectrum, where you can read the Fox, you can read the anti-Fox, you can read the CNBC, you can read the anti-CNBC. There's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of news you can consume, a lot of media you can consume, even across social media, right? If you look at Facebook and the way Facebook has kind of polarized itself, you can create echo chambers that are tailored to your specific worldview. That can be radical, that can be very orthodox, that can be very, to whatever it is. There is a multiplicity of of perspectives, and there is no shortage of an opinion. Like if you want to subscribe to a certain belief, maybe it's a flavor of socialism or a flavor of authoritarianism, you will find an outlet. You'll find a source that you'll be able to access. To me, the problem with American media is a little bit different. It's the fact that whatever you believe in, whatever you already believe in, or whatever you're already convinced of, um, the industry will deepen your echo chamber. They will almost like create a delusion for you to live in, and you can live in your own conspiracy theory. You can live in your own sort of belief or whatever it is, whatever you want it to be, and that has a very crazy, almost like a psychotic effect on people, as you can become so deeply convinced by whatever your delusion may be, right? Let's just call it a delusion for example, that you can live in an alternate reality, right? You can live in this echo chamber in social media, in traditional media, that's going to convince you with every single thing that you see that what you already believe is true. Whatever delusion you have, that's truth. And that isolates you and radicalizes you, and misinforms you and misleads you in ways that are hard to describe. It's a very different type of sin from the authoritarian propaganda machine of Eastern Europe. And I think it's very novel. I think it's definitely an effect of a proliferation of perspectives instead of the consolidation of them. Um, I'll stop here. I can talk about this forever.
I'm sure you can. So basically, what I've seen recently is, it's probably the algorithm is to me. It seems to be, it might be a delusion, is that UK is undergoing a Muslim takeover, and so is the US. And that's just happening for and Somalian takeover. And I'm like, it's not takeover. Like we have more people here than they have in their countries. Like, you know, so like how do you put the brakes on that, on that echo chamber from like fulfilling your whole entire social feed so that you believe it?
I mean, 100%. I mean, the first most obvious, but I think a lot of people would struggle with this is stop consuming social media. Stop consuming specifically news from social media. If you get your news from social media, which either you're getting it from like your friends reposting this and you like your friends, you trust your friends, or that you get it from the feed because you're subscribed to a news channel on Facebook or a news channel on another platform, just stop doing that. The algorithm of social media prioritizes virality, prioritizes sensationalism, prioritizes, emotional triggering. It doesn't prioritize facts. That friend that you like and that you trust, they reposted something not because they verified it. Nobody verifies anything. It's because they were triggered by it. And so you have the choice of, are you gonna, pass on this sort of triggering effect because you're angry at something, because you're agitated by something. It only feeds into the narrative of deepening the echo chamber, of proliferating the echo chamber. And I would strongly, just step one is stop consuming news, stop consuming real information from social media. Just treat it only as entertainment and only as socializing if you must. But don't consume information from social media. It's the incentives, the structural incentives that govern that industry and that ecosystem are opposed to factuality, opposed to accuracy. They are for triggering, and they're for sensationalizing. And we all know that. It's very obvious, right? It's very well acknowledged. And so that's just step one. I would say number two is don't just read um, you know one source. This is a hard advice because most people don't have the time to read anything, much less have the time to read multiple sources. But we believe, with like for example with informed.now, we believe that when you read news, you shouldn't be able to control what the news are about. When you read news, you should be surprised a little bit sometimes. It's like, oh wow, I had no idea that this was happening, or I had no idea that this is something you know that is newsworthy, right? Because if, for example, you subscribe to, for example, maybe it's Wall Street Journal, you're gonna get very much financial news, right? You might have financial leaning news, maybe even conservative thought, and it's going to dip in your echo chamber, even if you just read that, because there's things around technology, healthcare, culture, society, military that are happening, but are just underreported by Wall Street Journal because that's not their bread and butter. It's not their focus. And so, for example, like bringing this to informed.now, we have this mechanism where people aren't able to choose, hyper personalize what is presented to them. Because if they were, we would just be building an extremely effective echo chamber. And we don't want to contribute to that sort of philosophically, we don't agree with that trajectory. So our filter, kind of what our editorial machine looks at is significance. Is like how much is a certain news item changing the world and changing like life on earth for thousands, millions of people. And it's across different topics. So on a certain day, it could be more about technology and science. On a different day, it could be more about politics and culture. On another day, it could be more about military and healthcare updates, right? And so we look at the entire range of topics, but sometimes, and very very often, actually, our users say, "Oh, I was surprised to see that because no other news sources are talking about it." Right? It's like there is no niche for this. We like to sort of really diversify and mix in things that you wouldn't expect to see if you were building your own echo chamber.
So I got to tie this. This is the crypto hipster podcast, and I have to tie this into crypto and say that people make their investment decisions in crypto based on narrative. Well, not everybody, but like a huge part of investing in crypto is narrative, and it is relying on that echo chamber, right? So how can new investors, because a lot of people have their own ways of habits, right? How can they incorporate these narratives into their investment choices while still making objective choices in their investing? And the best method to really approach this narrative, crypto journalism area.
Yeah, wow, that's a tough one because I love what you said around, investors make decisions based on narratives. We all make every decision based on narratives, and I think when a decision is so consequential, such as allocating your capital towards, what is a high risk asset, I would try to really keep in mind every single narrative that is sort of prevalent. So not just reinforcing your own, but writing out and explicitly articulating, okay, so here's my narrative, here's like what I believe is happening. What do the other people say? Like if I'm a bull, what do the bears say? And I'd like to really articulate that narrative, right? And see them both and write them down. Don't just, flash them in your head. Quality of thought when it's inside our head is extremely low. It needs to be articulated, it needs to be expressed, it needs to be written out. And when you write out all of these different narratives, you know, obviously you should be tracking, a whole set of metrics, right, in the market, in the industry, well beyond the obvious, and see, at any given time, are these narratives relying on certain metrics to be true? For example, if I'm telling myself a narrative A, under narrative A, these metrics would need to indicate the following things. And you look at the indicators and say, okay, well, which narrative is supported the most by them right now? And it might change and it might cycle. And I think this exercise itself is an awareness that your narrative is just your narrative. It isn't the narrative. And keeping all of them sort of on monitor, on display, alongside the metrics that you're monitoring, I think is really important. And very few, it's very obvious, none of this is rocket science, but very few people do that. Very few people actually give voice to the dissenting narrative from their own. They come up with their opinion, they're like, this is exactly what I believe, and then they just collect confirmatory evidence. When that's not a bad way to do it, but you need to do the same for the other side. You must do the same for the other side if you're to hedge the risk of making an allocation decision. And so I would just encourage people to go back to the basics of, elucidate, articulate every single narrative, try to support them, try to give them the best, the strongest case before you pick what your narrative should be.
A lot of people won't do that, but it's time consuming.
No one's going to do it.
Yeah, but it makes a lot of sense to do it that way. Awesome. So I want to go back to one thing, a couple last questions. I want to talk about you being disabled. What lessons did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, flashback to what happened when I was a young lad. I was part of a car accident. That was a lethal car accident. The two drunk drivers that crashed into my family's car, immediately passed away, and it really changed the trajectory of my life, fundamentally, of my family's life. And without getting too much of the details, what happened to me was brain damage that caused amnesia, like long-term loss of memory, as well as a loss of short-term memory. Like for years, I couldn't remember things, I couldn't concentrate, and I couldn't learn. So after recovering motor functions, which took me some time, because when I woke up from this accident, I couldn't walk or talk, like communicate. I had to regain a lot of these base functions over some time, and then it took years of regaining what I earlier described as my attention, my focus. I couldn't learn, I couldn't remember things, and like I couldn't wield my focus. And that was one of the most, you know, disabling experiences of not being able to concentrate, because I believe that as humans, our superpower is our attention, is our ability to wield our attention. And when that's robbed, when that's robbed from us, it's extremely difficult to do anything. So for me, it was just years of disorientation and the feeling of like, shit, like that's it. I'm cooked. There's nothing I can do to get back. Um, and I think, there's lots of lessons that I've learned along the way. Uh, Perhaps the most fundamental is anything can make you stronger if you let it, but you have to let it, and you have to find the the persistence, the grit, the I don't know, the chip on your shoulder to get back up and to build back your life, because it's possible. I am a living example of that, and I you know believe that for everybody, no exceptions. But you have to not treat yourself as a victim, even though, like, in that situation, objectively, I was a victim. Um, but you don't want to have that become your identity, right? It's like you can be a victim of a certain circumstance, but you don't have to adopt victimhood as your identity moving forwards for the rest of your life. I think that's very important. And I think, to summarize all this, every tragedy, every accident, anything has the chance to make you stronger if you let it.
Got it. I love that. That's wonderful to hear. I'm going to take that on too. So thank you. And I want to thank you very, very much for your time today. I enjoyed speaking with you. And I have only one last question. It's how can people find out more information about you and about Inform Now?
I
How
really, yeah, I really appreciate it. It's been delightful being part of this conversation. Thank you for welcoming me on your show. If there are any news minimalists among us that are interested in what we're doing, our website is our brand name, so it's literally informed.now. And it's a way to learn more about our mission, what we're doing, and be part of the revolution that we're looking to bring to a new generation of people who are tired of bullshit in media, especially bullshit in news media. And I'm very friendly on LinkedIn, Kira Shishkin on LinkedIn. I'm the only of my kind, and I would be, meaning I'm the only one who has that name. And I'd be delighted to connect with anyone who is inspired by what we're doing, or interested in jamming on ideas, or wants to trade war stories. We'll be more than happy to connect.
awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Jamil.